Hey gang, Chonky here. Today's going to be part 4 of Liberty's Crusade Abridged, covering chapters 7 and 8. A little recap of what happened last time. Jim Raynor and Mike Liberty were able to catch up to the Colonial Magistrate's forces, and they were able to destroy the infected command center at Backwater Station, which is effectively the second mission of the Terran campaign in Starcraft. And after that, they were summarily arrested by Colonel Duke. Not Mike, though, because seeing as how he had Rourke's ID tag, he was able to escape, saying that he was not, in fact, Mike Liberty. As he was leaving the area, he ran into Sarah Kerrigan, who informed him that Mike Liberty is now dead because Rourke was on a bus with a bunch of other journalists, and the bus was strafed by a fire bat. Mike thinks it was from the news story that he did at the start of the book, the one where he upset the old families of the Confederacy, when Kerrigan says that it was more likely Colonel Duke issuing a command to silence Mike Liberty because he had seen too much for his own good, that being the Zerg, the colonial militia fighting against the Zerg, and also the Protoss as well. So at the end of chapter 6, Kerrigan sets up a holodeck and opens up a transmission to Arcturus Mengsk, who asks Mike Liberty to join the Sons of Korhal. So chapter 7 is entitled Deals, and I will read you the Liberty Manifesto. Arcturus Mengsk. There's a name that is synonymous with terror, betrayal, and violence. A living example of the ends justifying the means. The assassin of the Confederacy of Man. The hero of the blasted world of Korhal 4. King of the universe. A savage barbarian who never let anything or anyone get in his way. And yet, he is also charming, erudite, and intelligent. When you're in his presence, you feel that he's really listening to you. That your opinions matter. That you're someone important if you agree with him. It's amazing. I have often wondered if men like Mengsk don't carry around their own reality-warping bubbles, and all who fall in are suddenly transported to another dimension, where the hellish things he says and does suddenly make sense. At least, that's the effect he always had on me. So starting at chapter 7, we immediately pick up where we left off with Arcturus' last words to finish off chapter 6 were, I'm Arcturus Mengsk, leader of the Sons of Korhal. I would like to ask you to join us. And I guess after he asks this question, there's just a bit of silence because Kerrigan is, observing, and Mike is just in awe that he's talking to Mengsk, the most wanted man in the Confederacy. And so after a minute, Arcturus sort of breaks the silence and says, is this thing working? Do we have a clear connection? And Kerrigan replies, yes, sir, we read you loud and clear. And so then Arcturus prompts Mike again. He's like, can you hear me, Mike? And he's like, I can hear you. I just don't know I can believe what I'm hearing. You're the most hated man in the Confederacy. And this humors Mengsk. He chuckles, and it says that he folds his hands across his broad, muscle-flat belly. He says, you honor me, but I must reply that I am only the most hated man amongst the Confederacy's elites. Those elites who make it their mission to keep everyone else under their thumbs. Those who choose to think otherwise are cast out. I have survived that casting out, and as such, I am a danger to them. And Mike talks about how Mengsk's words just kind of wash over him like warm honey. Like, he could say anything and Mike would just say, yes, sir. Or just like agree wholeheartedly. He says that his manner and voice screamed politician in every turn, and that Arcturus seems like a creature who would be welcome in any of the like city council rooms on Tarsonis, because it's also like the corrupt political type, and Arcturus would just be right at home manipulating all of them. So Mike kind of, before answering the question, just says, man, I know a lot of reporters who would really like to have a talk with you. And Arcturus humors them. You're among them, I hope. I've been a fan of your work for many years. I must admit my surprise at seeing your illustrious name attached to a mere military reporting. And, Mike just shrugs, maybe blushing a little bit at the praise, and he's like, yeah, there were extenuating circumstances. And Mengsk, smiling again, just trying to win over Mike, says, of course. And also, I fear my own vagabond lifestyle has prevented a suitable interview from being set up. The few that have been managed were very quickly spoiled by the Confederacy. I think I understand what you mean. And so, obviously, it sounds like, Mengsk has been trying to talk with Mike for a while, but for one reason or another, the Confederacy has kind of intervened. And then Mike thinks also of Rourke, how Mike exchanged tags with Rourke just to try and get a scoop on Anthem Base. And what ended up happening? Well, a terrorist stole a Firebat set of armor and wiped the bus with plasma fire and just cooked everybody, including Rourke. And then he also thinks about Raynor locked up in orbit on a prison ship after they saved Backwater Station, and it's all because Mike Liberty reported on it. And then Mengsk brings him back to the moment. He says, I know my reputation precedes me, Michael. May I call you Michael? If you want to. And I must tell you that this reputation is fully deserved. I am, by Confederate lights, a terrorist, an agent of chaos against the old order. My father was Angus Mengsk, who first led the people of Korhal 4 in rebellion against the Confederacy. And then Mike, coldly brings up, and paid for it with the death of the planet. Yes, and I carry their ghosts with me every day of my life. They were branded rebels and revolutionaries by the Confederates, but, as you well know, it is the victors who are given the luxury of writing the histories. And then as Mike is, just kind of listening, Mengsk continues on. He says, I make no apologies for the actions of the Sons of Korhal. There is blood on my hands for my actions, but I have yet to reach the 35 million lives that the Confederacy claimed on Korhal 4. And then, Mike is trying to, prod for weakness, and he says, oh yeah, is that a target number that you're reaching for? And by saying this, he expected, a flash of anger, or a bit of bitterness, or a quick rebuttal, but instead, Mengsk just, laughs it off and says, no, I cannot hope to compete with the merciless bureaucracy of the Confederacy of Man. They wave the banners of old Earth, but no ancient government would have tolerated the inhumanity that the Confederacy considers business as usual. And those who would raise the alarm are either silenced by violence or shamed into complicity through comfort. And then Mike is like, well, yeah, that would be us in the press, thinking of Handy Anderson and how he was given this amazing grand office with a whole view of Tarsonis City, even though he absolutely hates heights, but he still accepted it. And I'm sure also there was monetary compensation as well. And then Mengsk continues, the shoe very well may fit, though I will not press the point. I know that you, for one, are a rare individual who has not shrunk away from always seeking the truth. And then Mike, kind of gestures around at the warehouse that him and Kerrigan are in. So all this is to set up an interview opportunity? And then, laughing again, because Mengsk is trying to disarm Mike, says there will be time for interviews later. There are more pressing matters at the moment. You know the refugee situation in the hinterlands? And Mike, nods his head. He said, I've visited a few of them. They've emptied the cities, and the people are now waiting in the wilderness for the Confederacy dropships to come for them. And then Mengsk replies, and what would you say if I told you there would be no such ships coming? Mike kind of takes a moment and blinks, and then, suddenly feels Kerrigan's stare on him. I'd have a hard time believing that. They may be delayed, but they wouldn't just abandon the populace here, would they? And then Mengsk lets out a big sigh and continues, well, it's true, I'm afraid. None are en route. Indeed, Colonel Duke has been very busy the past few days uprooting the Confederate military structure here, preparing to retreat at the first appearance of the Protoss, or at the overwhelming success of the Zerg. And then these names immediately, perk up Mike's interest. He's like, what do you know about the Protoss and the Zerg? Because, remember, he's only been privy to the Zerg for about a day and a half now, and to the Protoss for, less than a week. And Mengsk continues, more than I want to admit. Suffice it to say that they are ancient races, and that they hate each other. And they have little or no use for the human race, either. In that way, they are very much like the Confederacy. And then Mike cuts in. He said, "I've seen both the Zerg and the Protoss at work. I have a hard time believing that they are anything like human." And then Mengsk continues, "Even though the Confederacy plans to abandon the population of Marsara, to let the Zerg overrun them from below, or the Protoss vaporize them from above, this system is nothing more than a giant petri dish to the bureaucrats on Tarsonis, where they can watch these alien races duel and plan on how to save their own hides. Can you, as a man, stand aside and watch this happen?" And Mike, thinks back to how he saw Chowsara and how it looked like oily water or like glass was covering the surface, and then in a few spots the Protoss had punched through the core and magma was just spilling out everywhere. "You have a solution then, Mengsk? And this solution somehow involves me?" And Mengsk replies, "I am a man with great but not unlimited resources. I have my own ships en route to ferry as many people as I can out of the system. Kerrigan has located the bulk of the camps and spread sufficient anti-Confederate ideals that we may be welcomed as heroes. I have also been in contact with the fragments of this planet's government, but I need a friendly face to reassure them that we do indeed come in peace." So this is like right after Backwater Station, where you have to defend for 30 minutes until the Sons of Korhal ships arrive. That's essentially what's happening right here. "And that's where I come in?" said Mike. "Yes, that's where you come in. Your reputation precedes you as well." And then Mike thinks about both the Protoss and the Zerg and how they are inevitably coming, but then also thinks back to who Mengsk is and says, "I won't fashion propaganda for you." And then Mengsk, expecting Mike to have somewhat of a stance like this, says, "I'm not asking you to do so. You can report what you see, which is more than the Confederacy allows you now, under their military strictures. I would expect no less from a reporter of your caliber." And then, Mengsk lets Mike absorb that a little bit and then continues on, "If there's anything I can do to help you further." And then Mike immediately has an idea and thinks of Raynor imprisoned with the magistrate's marines. He says, "I have some associates in Confederate custody." And then Mengsk, looks over at Kerrigan and she says, "Local militia and law enforcement officers, sir. They were captured and secured in a prison ship. I can find the location." And then, Mengsk just kind of ponders a little bit and says, "Ask no small favors, eh, Michael? All right, but you have to help with it. But first," and then Mike is, I know, I have to write my bloody press release." "Exactly. If we are agreed, then I'll let Lieutenant Kerrigan take care of the details." And then at that moment, Mengsk's holodeck just disappears. Transmission ended. So now that the transmission is over, Mike is thinking about the report he needs to write, but also Mengsk in general. And he looks over at Kerrigan and kind of lets out a deep breath. "Are you still reading my mind?" And Kerrigan says, "It's hard not to." "Then I don't trust him. I don't trust Mengsk." "I know. But you trust that he'll live up to his side of the bargain. Come on, let's get started." So then there's a break. Mike does his press release explaining that the Sons of Korhal are coming to save the people of Marsara. And then we jump to the prison ship Merrimack, which is in orbit over Marsara, and how Merrimack is a Leviathan-class battlecruiser that's been stripped of everything useful except for life support. And even then, it's still quirky and unreliable, and essentially it's just a holding pin for prisoners or terrorists or just people in general. But it also stipulates that it's not just bad guys that are held there. There's homegrown militia, marshals, and a few outspoken local leaders. So pretty much anybody who voiced against the evacuation of Marsara or wanted to be more privy as to what was going on, locked up, right to jail. And with the prisoners all being kept behind bulkheads, just thick metal doors that they couldn't open, none of them really knew that the ship was just being manned by a skeleton crew. So there's literally just a few guys who are maintaining the ship. And it mentions that over the last couple days, Marsara's orbit has been completely abandoned except for the Merrimack and then the NORAD 2, as it just monitors the situation. And while we're here on the Merrimack, it talks about Captain Elias Tudbury, the remaining ranking officer on board the Merrimack, as they've slowly been evacuated over time. You know, the more important figures get evacuated first. And now the very last shuttle scheduled for evacuation is about an hour late. And Captain Elias is very, antsy. He really wants to get off the ship. He doesn't necessarily know what's going on the planet, but since they've been taking all the officials one by one, he's just, he wants out. He wants to get out of there, and he doesn't care that they're abandoning the prisoners to whatever forces come. And while he's sitting there waiting for the shuttle, you can hear a crackle over the speakers, but it is broken. It says, "Prison Port 54, Rick, Sting clear for docking." Passphrase, and then it cuts out a little bit, and then the communications officer, repeat transmission 5467. I say again, repeat transmission, and then it comes back, still broken. Is in shuttle 67 requesting clearance. King pass. More static, and then continues on. Interfere. We would pull off and again later, and since he doesn't want to wait because he wants to get the hell off the ship, Tudbury switches on the mic. He pushes the comm officer out of the way. So shuttle 5467, y'all are cleared for docking. Get your ass in here and get us off this tub now. And as the hydraulics of the ship, as the hydraulics of the shuttle link up to the battle cruiser, Tudbury rushes into the hangar bay, pushing through his guys. He says, "This is a non-standard situation, son. Grab your gear and spread the word. We're getting out of this here wreck now." And so he's just trying to get the skeleton crew. And as he runs up to the door, not even waiting for it to open because he just wants to get out, the airlock slides open, and then it says Captain Tudbury was looking down the barrel of a large bore slug thrower. And at the operating end of the slug thrower was a lean man with a ponytail who looked like someone Tudbury had seen on the UNN. And it's Michael Liberty. He just says, "Boo." And then it says it took about 10 minutes for Mike Liberty and the men who are on the Sons of Korhal. It took about 10 minutes for their little group to overpower the skeleton crew on the Merrimack, and they are able to successfully shuttle everyone that's not Confederate off of the ship, including Rayner, who is incredibly grateful. He says, "I'll admit that when I told you to do something, I did not expect this." And then Mike Young's like, "Stop," because he has a crush on Rayner. "Let's just say I made a deal with the devil, and it worked out to our benefit." And then almost as if on cue, Mengsk's face pops up on the shuttle's view screen, he immediately hails the shuttle. And, "Congratulations, Michael. We must report success as well with our endeavor. We have been welcomed with open arms by the people of Marsara, and even now our ships are evacuating the refugees. I have come to understand that even Colonel Duke is unwilling to fire on ships filled with innocents, and the turn of events has vexed him dearly." And then Rayner leans forward and looks on the screen. He's like, "Mengsk? This is Jim Rayner. I just wanted to thank you for your help in getting us off that hulk." And then without missing a beat, Mengsk replies, "Ah, Marshal Rayner. Michael apparently thinks very highly of you and your men. I was wondering if you would be willing to help me in a small favor." And it says that Mengsk's smile fills the screen because you know that this is something that he wanted. He has only heard tales of Rayner and his bravery and his willing to do what is right, and Mengsk knows that he can just exploit that to no end. And Mike cuts in, says, "Now wait a minute, Mengsk. We made a deal here and we did our part. And that bargain is done, Michael. But now I want to offer a similar arrangement to the former marshal and his men. Something I hope will be beneficial to all our peoples." And that is the end of Chapter 7. So, Chapter 8 is called Zerg and the Protoss, which is a little misleading because this chapter covers the Jacob's installation mission, which, if you guys don't remember, is the first sort of infiltration mission you do in Starcraft, where Rayner is in command of a few guys and you have to get out a data disk from a installation that is operated by the Alpha Squadron, or Colonel Duke's men. Anyway, here's the Liberty Manifesto for Chapter 8. It would be easy to declare that Arcturus Mengsk was a master manipulator, which he was. or that he regularly deceived others, which was true as well. But it would be a mistake to deny all personal responsibility in falling into his web. It seems now the height of folly ever to have dealt with the man. But think of the situation when the Sara system died. You had the mindless beasts of the Zerg on one side, and the unholy fury of the Protoss on the other. And in the middle, you had the criminal bureaucracy of the old Confederacy of Man, which was willing to write off the population of 2 planets in order to learn more about its enemies. With such a surplus of devils in this universe, what did it matter if there was one more? So when we last left off on the shuttle, Mengsk was propositioning Raynor about the Jacobs installation. We don't know what he was talking about, but we know right here, it immediately starts out saying the Jacobs installation was built into the side of a mountain on the far side of Marsara, away from all the major cities. And we know now that everybody is en route. Like, they only have a few minutes before the Protoss are wiping the planet, because everybody has been evacuated at this point, and they need to just get in and out while the security is thin. And while they're getting their ragtag team, led by Raynor, and more of the militiamen and a few of the Sons of Korhal Marines, as they're getting over to the Jacobs installation, Mike begins to wonder, like, what else does Mengsk know? He knew about the Protoss, he knew about the Zerg, he knows about the Jacobs installation. He seems to be a man that is incredibly well connected. And then as he's thinking about all of the potentials of what Mengsk could know or operate on, Liberty suddenly felt as though he were at the epicenter of a bomb site, and the countdown had already begun. And he's referring to just working with Mengsk in general. Like, he's willing to help the guy, because obviously Mengsk will give him something that he wants, but he knows that just nothing good is going to come of this situation. And then he goes back to talk about how the planet was already unraveling. You could see destruction on, like, random view screens, like as they would, like, flip through channels. You could just see parts of the planet just being decimated by tons of Zerg. Like, creep was already taking over the planet. And it even mentions that the creep, while it had not reached the Jacobs installation yet, they could see strange Zerg towers, which are probably creep colonies, on the horizon. And that, they could see skittering movements in the backgrounds as well. So, Zerg forces are on the move, and eventually it will be at the Jacobs installation. And as they get close to said installation, they are immediately fired on by the security detail that's been left there. It's just a couple Marines and then a few, like, sentry turrets. As they get close to the ground, Mike reminds himself, I'm not doing this for Mengsk, I'm doing it for Raynor. Because, Raynor is a buddy of his, he saved Mike's life, he witnessed Raynor doing things for the greater good, like burning Anthem Base and setting fire to Backwater and standing up to Colonel Duke when nobody else would. It mentions that as the Sons of Korhal dropship gets close to the entrance of the installation, all the guards that were there were more interested in fleeing. So as they did fire on the dropship, but when the dropship showed no signs of retreat, everybody just kind of scattered, because they just wanted to live at that point. They've already seen a lot of shit go down. But the moment they get inside, the resistance immediately stiffens up. Like, there's defensive guns mounted everywhere, which, since it's unmanned, there's no emotion. It just turns on and fires on enemy units. And these things are everywhere. They're erupting up around every corner, and it says that Raynor almost immediately loses 2 men, which causes the entire group to grow immensely more cautious. Mike mentions that there's probably a computer. He says, we need to find some control computer in order to shut down the turrets, and Raynor agrees, betting that they're on the far side of the guns that they're currently fighting. And as they're trying to make it through the hallway, it describes Raynor ducking through hallways, spraying spikes in a wide arc, just aiming for as many turrets as he can. Mike's following as close behind him as possible. Remember that Mike does have a power suit now. He has a CMC 200, which, while it will protect him from small arms fire, something like an automated Confederate turret probably has the means to punch through the armor and hurt him. But Mike still is far better off with this armor and a Gauss rifle than he was just by his lonesome. After clearing those turrets, they make it about 100 feet farther into the hallway, where they come into another intersection. And at this point, several more turrets pop up like mechanical gophers and just begin spraying down the hallway that they come from. Mike and Raynor are able to dodge into a doorway while 3 other Marines jump into another, and unfortunately one is not fast enough and just gets absolutely shredded by turret fire. It says that his fall forward is slowed by the continual impacts of spikes against his helmet and shattered chest plate. So, this guy gets blah 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 lit up, and as he's like falling forward dead, his body's just getting held up. So very slow motion death fall. And while Raynor's freaking out, talking about how they need to find a way to take out all the turrets, Mike looks around at the room that they are in, because they did just dive through a doorway, and he says he found something, and it looked something that was akin to a typical comm center, with zooming screens on either side and altogether too many buttons. But the screens showed what looked like a diagram on the installation itself. So Mike immediately recognizes that this is like some sort of crude map of the installation, and all these dots that are popping up are potential turrets. And while he's looking at the map, he sees that a bunch of the dots on the map are red, and these are the turrets that they have already passed by and destroyed. So Mike, not being very computer savvy, just kind of panics for a second. He's like, Raynor, do you know anything about computers? And Raynor's response is, well, I had to replace the memory board on my Vulture once. Oh, that's just dandy. And so he's just kind of like pushing as many buttons as he can, just looking for anything that'll help. And as he's hitting something, it says he hits a toggle, and one of the green lights went out, and then he hit another, and then another one vanished. And so he just starts flipping all these different toggles, and eventually all of the turrets in the area are shut down, which Raynor is very pleased to see. And then Mike immediately starts pushing more buttons, because he's like, oh, well, if that worked, let's see what these other buttons do. And he pushes a button, and it says, somewhere deep in the complex, a klaxon sounded, and then there was a vibration under their feet. And Raynor's very scared. He's like, what in the Sam Hill was that? And Mike just kind of chuckles and looks scared. He says, that was the sound of me pushing my luck too far. And they don't know what they opened, but my guess is that they've opened up the cages that contained the Zerglings. So, Raynor's like, why did you do that? Why are you pushing buttons? And Mike, still panicking slightly, says, it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. I'm sorry. And then Raynor, just kind of slightly frustrated now, sighs a little bit and says, can you at least get the data we're looking for off this terminal? And Mike, shakes his head no. But as he's like tracing his finger, he finds something. He says, this one's separate from the mainframe. It's not linked up. This has to be it. The best way to protect information from hackers is to completely separate the machine that it's on. Basic computer security 101. And then Raynor's like, all right, that settles it. Well, then let's go whack some varmints. And they immediately step out. At the moment they step out of the doorway, spikes just like pepper them, and they fall back. And Raynor, all surprised, says, Liberty, I thought you got all the gun emplacements. And Mike is like, those are not gun emplacements. Those are live targets. And indeed, there was a pair of white armored Marines now at the crossroads. And we know that the white armor is indicative of the Alpha Squadron. So these are some of Colonel Duke's men. And as they're shooting at, Mike, Raynor, and the other guys, Mike brings up his own weapon and leans forward for a shot, but he couldn't shoot. Like he's killed Zerglings at this point. He's blown up, pop-up turrets, but when it comes to a living human, he just can't take the life of another human. And so he just kind of, he's hesitating. He can't pull the trigger. And a Marine sees Mike and just starts firing at him, and he ducks behind the doorway. And Raynor is, all, very surprised, says, what happened? Are they in cover? And then Mike is just, and he's stammering a bunch. He says, I can't shoot them. And Raynor is like, what do you mean? You took out a Zerg with a shotgun. I saw you. And he's like, yeah, but this is different. These are human. And Raynor just kind of Raynor's killed people before, so he doesn't care. But he's like, that's okay. Lots of folks have a problem with shooting other people. The good news is they don't know you don't want to shoot them. Fire a little over their heads. That'll spook them. Promise. And so Mike is like, and then he pushes Mike back out of the doorway to shoot at these Marines. And they immediately, the Marines start to, they see Mike and they start to trace their guns over to him. And Mike rolls, after he gets pushed, he does a dodge roll. And Mike brings his gun up about a foot over the head of one of the Marines and just starts spraying. And the Marine, thinking that he's going to die, there's 2 Marines there, and they immediately, duck for cover to try and, not get shot. And then seeing them duck for cover, even though Mike wasn't trying to shoot them, Mike just kind of chuckles to himself and is, smirking. But then he's immediately, caught off guard, because as those 2 Marines duck down for cover, And it says that he sees the chest of one of the soldiers blossoms into a fountain of blood. And then his companion who goes to look at his buddy dying, his head is just, it is turned into red mist. And then Mike is surprised when he looks around and he sees Raynor posted right up above him. And he just kind of looks down with confidence and says, I understand if you have a problem shooting people. Fortunately, I don't. Now let's go. So they continue on into the installation. All the pop-up turrets have been deactivated by Mike on the computer, and they're not really running into any other Marines at this point. So they're pretty much just sprinting through these halls, and Mike is in front since he saw the map. Mike seems to let his guard down a little bit because as he's rounding a corner, he realizes that it wasn't smart to just sprint into an unchecked hallway. And as he sprints around a corner, he trips over a Zergling that was just kind of sitting there, just, being mindless. And as he trips over it, the Zergling immediately, gets startled and leaps at him. And as it leaps at him, Mike puts the Gauss rifle under the stomach because, he tripped over it. So he's on the ground now. And Mike puts the gun under the Zergling and just starts unloading as the Zergling jumps at him. And after he absolutely blows apart this Zergling, he stands up all covered in goo and ichor. And Raynor is dumbfounded. He says, what are the Zerg doing here? So Raynor, kind of dumbfounded by the situation, says, what are the Zerg doing here? And Mike just suggests, well, maybe they're after what we're after. And Raynor, much more hurriedly now, says, we got to get that information now and get out of here. And then Mike, just kind of muttering to himself because he's covered in animal or Zergling blood, says, let's find a shower. And because he's, just covered in goo. So it says that the complex had a few more surprises left in store for our boys. All the turrets have been shut down as we spoke about, but they come into a passage where there's a much wider room, and there's a few more Zerglings waiting within. They kill them all, and as they kill them, they kind of pause for a moment, and it looks like there's a row of cages along the wall that, and they stink. It says they have the fetid smell of Zerg. And so Raynor's they were keeping them here. Pets, maybe? For studies, maybe? I don't know. And then Mike says, yeah, but for how long? Christ, look at this. And he sees a computer next to the cages. And Raynor's is this the information we're looking for? And Mike says, well, that and more. Look at this. These are readings on the Zerg going back months. Well, that's impossible, said Raynor, unless the Confederates knew about the Zerg all this time. They knew they were here. Hell, they may have even brought them here. And then Raynor, Samuel J. Houston on a bicycle. Oh, let's get the disc and let's move out. And then Mike, just still trying to crunch numbers, says, I'm working on it. All right. And then beep, the disc pops out and we, get the data disc. Got it. Let's go. And as they pluck the disc from the system, a very Hollywood-esque tropes voice sounds above them. Self-destruct sequence initiated. So, oh shit, it's been booby-trapped. We have to get out of here. And then Raynor's we got to move now, and we can't afford to make any wrong turns. And it says Mike and his lighter armor led, now unafraid of running into any other surprises. They encountered nothing but dead on their way out. And the soft tones above them warning, 10 seconds to detonation. 5 seconds to detonation. Right when it says about 5 seconds, they get just outside of the installation, and Mike is still just sprinting. But as he's sprinting, Raynor catches up with him and just tackles him. And at first, Mike is it says he curses at the marshal, so maybe he drops an F-bomb. But as he's cursing out Jim Raynor, the explosion goes off, and it just completely decimates the space directly above Mike and Raynor's. Whoom! And Mike realizes that if Raynor hadn't tackled him into the ground, he would have been swept off of his feet and blown to pieces by this massive explosion. So Mike thanks him as he gets up, and then Raynor says, seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Come on, let's get back before the Zerg find us here. Because remember, they can see creep colonies on the horizon. So Zerg are coming. So they got a boogie. So we make a little bit of a jump, not too far, but now we're heading back to the Hyperion where Mengsk is waiting for the troops. Mike does comment that compared to the bridge of the NORAD 2, the Hyperion is much smaller and cozier. It seems more like an an elaborate den or library than the nerve center of a rebel fleet, but it still has its fair share of technicians like walking around speaking softly into comm units. Mike does notice that Lieutenant Kerrigan does not appear to be on the flagship. She seems to be gone. And as Raynor hands the disc to Mengsk, he says, "There were Zerg there. The Confederates have been studying these damn aliens for months." And then Mengsk, being unsurprised because he knows everything, says, "Years, actually. I saw Zerg in Confederate holding pens myself, and that was over a year ago. It's clear the Confederates have known of these creatures for some time. For all we know, they could be breeding them." And Mike just says nothing. He's completely unsurprised at this point, learning that the Confederacy has some weird, dark secrets. It says that the bottom had dropped out of the Confederate secrets market. There was nothing that they could do that would surprise him anymore. But Raynor, still fresh to this idea, is absolutely livid. His jaw drops and he says, "You mean they've been using my planet as some sort of laboratory for these things? Your planet and your sister world, and gods know how many more fringe worlds. They've sowed the wind, my friend, and now they are reaping the whirlwind." And Mike is watching Raynor and says that for his first time in knowing Raynor, Raynor just stops in his tracks. Almost like the true comprehension of what's been going on is too much for his local law enforcement brain. Like, he could not comprehend that the Confederacy would use actual planets as testing grounds for alien warfare. Either how to fight against them, how to use them as weapons, anything. And Raynor is just absolutely appalled. Who would you arrest for the crimes of genocide? Like, how do you punish for this thing if you're a local marshal? You can't do anything. You're absolutely helpless. And then Mike kind of speaks up. He says, "I have to write up a report that's going to summarize everything we found so far." And then Mengsk sets him up. He says, "Oh yeah, there's a comm station over there, but you'll know that they will never run this story." And Mike knows they'll never run the story. He admits that he still has to take the chance anyway. But if they were paranoid enough to send Mike on a military detail over a little construction scandal, how willing would they be to admit, that they were dealing with planet-devouring aliens? And as Mike is starting to walk over to the comm station, there's a chime that comes out of one of the computers, and one of the technicians speaks up. "We're getting warp signals at Mark 4.5.7. And then Mengsk replies, "Pull back to a safe distance. Scan on maximum. Gentlemen, you may remain if you want to see the last act of this particularly tawdry passion play." So it says that neither Mike nor Raynor moved, and then Mengsk turned back to the screen. The orange ball of Marsara loomed over them. A few white clouds scattered across its northern hemisphere, yet most of that orange surface was now mottled and spoiled, overrun by creep and the things that lived in it. So the Zerg have pretty much taken over almost all of Marsara now. And then off in the distance, still in orbit, there's a flash. The flash of blue-white electricity. And then they were there. A fleet. Looks like golden carriers with their moth attendants and metallic bat-winged creations that wove among the larger ships. They were breathtaking and deadly. Forces of war raised to the level of an art form. So as they're watching the Protoss come in, Mike sees out of the corner of his eye that Mengsk kind of says something into like a caller microphone, and he can feel the engines prime on the Hyperion. They're not leaving yet, but Mike knows that Mengsk is just getting ready, because the moment the Protoss sort of send any sort of hostility towards Mengsk, they want to just jump out of there as quickly as possible. But they do want to see exactly what they're up against, so they want to watch the Protoss in action. Mike does comment internally that Mengsk didn't need to worry. The Protoss obviously are more intent on the planet overrun by the Zerg than they are with this one paltry ship floating in orbit. Kind of like how they paid no attention to the NORAD 2. They just nuked Chowsara and then got out of there. They noticed that the planets sort of position themselves, and then they lance themselves downwards towards the planet's surface, and then immediately energy starts to glow, and then beams shoot out down into the planet. And then it says when the energy beam struck, they burned. The sky itself curdled as the beams pierced through the atmospheric envelope. Air itself was torn away from the planet by the force of the blows. And then Mike, as he's watching these beams hit the planet, notes that as the beam struck the surface, they erupted, boiling the ground where they struck, uprooting both the creep-infested lands and those that had not yet been affected. Deadly rainbow radiation, more brilliant than Mike had ever seen, spiraled out from the impact points, churning earth and water mercilessly. distorting the matter of the planet itself. And then after the big ships start to do this, he notices that smaller ships sort of line up and start doing this as well. And as they're looking at the surface, Mike notices that all of the heavily infested areas, the cities that used to be on Marsara, are the places that are getting targeted, including an area that they had just been at, the Jacobs installation. So this place gets nuked as well. And keep in mind, you know, we don't know how long of a gap it was for them to get up to the Hyperion from the Jacobs installation, but I can't guess that it's more than maybe like an hour or two from when they were picked up to when the Protoss arrived, just, you know, knowing how fast things move in StarCraft. So Mike is kind of like shitting bricks all of a sudden, realizing that they had cut their timing very close. They could have been, you know, getting hit by that pulsing energy beam from the sky. And as he's thinking about this close call, he just looks out at the surface of Marsara and sees that magma is now pushing up to the surface in all areas of the planet. You know, especially where these energy beams are hitting, but everything is just burning. It's as if most of the world's atmosphere was burning now, torn away from the orb in a veil that trailed it in orbit, and what was left spiraled in hurricanes and tornadoes until destroyed by more beams. And as they see all these red volcanoes pop up everywhere, Mike just kind of mutters to himself, "They're exterminators. They're cosmic exterminators." And then, not expecting Mengsk to hear, but he replies anyway, says, "Indeed. And they can't or won't tell the difference between us and the Zerg. Maybe to them there is no difference. We should prepare for departure. They may notice us at any time." And then Mike, you know, looks over at Raynor, who has never seen the Protoss before. He's only heard about it from Confederate Marines, and he is just stone-faced and grim and clutching the railing. He's white-knuckled right now on this railing. He's just so scared and distraught, and the only thing alive on him were his eyes, and they were filled with an infinite sadness. "Raynor? Jim? Are you all right?" "No. I mean, can any of us be all right after this?" And then says that Mike had no reply. They just sat there together and watched as the planet died. And then after a few more moments, Arcturus Mengsk's voice softly came over the PA system and says, "We are ready for departure." And then Raynor, just kind of accepting it, says, "All right." And as he says this, he never looks away from the devastation. And that's the end of Chapter 8. Thank you guys so much for watching. We are now halfway through the book. There's 17 chapters in here, so we'll probably do 3 chapters for the very end. But yeah, 8 chapters down, 9 more to go, and thank you so much for hanging out with me in this journey. I hope you guys had a happy holidays, and here's to a happy new year. See ya.